I've been lucky enough to help a ton of people relocate to the Twin Cities between my team and myself, probably more than anybody else. And I think probably the one most important thing that I've learned through helping so many people is trying to understand how they're approaching the search, how they're approaching the move. We actually have a podcast on a separate channel called Welcome to the Twin Cities, where we've interviewed our previous clients, right? People who we've helped relocate. We've interviewed them and sort of talked through how they approached the search, how they approached the move, so that we could sort of reverse engineer what we're doing to best help people in the future, potentially you, whoever's watching this. And one thing that we do very, very often in our Zoom calls is sort of a broad overview of the Twin Cities. If especially people don't have a very specific place that they're looking to move. Most people have a level of flexibility for where they're going to move when they come to the Twin Cities. And so I don't do very many map videos, right? I do some where I'm just sitting here talking, but my favorite videos to do, I think what are the most interesting and the most helpful are sort of the virtual tours where I'm out in an area and really trying to be immersive, because that's kind of how I learn, right? I learn through visuals. There's going to be a lot of visual aids that come along with this video. I got my computer right here and we're going to dive into maps and all sorts of things, because I know that while a video and actually showing a place is very, very helpful to people, I also think that just sort of top down looking at maps is actually the way that a lot of people start to consider their move. So what I'm hoping I can do is demystify the Twin Cities on the whole and give you the hits, the things that are probably most likely places that you're wondering about or questions that you would have. So if that sounds helpful to you, then stick around. How's it going, friends? My name is Jesse Lynch. I run the hardest working real estate team in the game. We're called To the Twin Cities. And you can check out our website, tothetwincities.com. But this YouTube channel, it's all about helping you find a place to call home here in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. And relocations is what we do. It's what we focus all of our energy, all of our time, all of our problem solving on. And we do our best to make the best and most immersive videos anywhere on the internet, right here on this channel. So if that appeals to you, then do me a favor, do yourself a favor, subscribe to this channel, click the bell to get notified so you can see when these videos come out. And if you're interested in working with us, which if you're brand new to this channel, if this is the first video, wait and see. Watch this video, watch other videos, see if it's helpful. But if you've watched a bunch and you're interested in working with us, we would love to help. We say this every video. You can go to our website, tothetwincities.com. We have a contact form there that you can fill out in like 30 seconds or less. Or you can shoot us an email directly to info@tothetwincities.com. We would love to help you. We really get to help just the best clients. And this sounds cheesy, but the people that we've been able to work with have been such an absolute delight. And pretty much everybody comes off of this YouTube channel. And pretty much everybody finds us on this YouTube channel. So reach out and we'll get things going, get things headed in the right direction, and we will crush it for you. So in the interest of keeping things immersive, we're gonna dive into the map, and I'm just gonna be a little guy in the corner for a lot of the video, not for all of it, even though I'm not a little guy at all. So first things first, obviously, this is the state of Minnesota. It's not going to be this simple, I promise. And the Twin Cities Metro is this gray region. More or less, the gray means that it's developed to some extent, right? It's a metro, it's a city, it's a municipality, and it's basically not a rural place. That said, some of these places on the very edges still might feel a little rural, but for the most part, they are not. And that's a simple way of figuring out what you're looking at. Specifically on Google Maps. Google Maps is obviously huge, right? But it's actually genuinely a very, very helpful asset in helping people relocate. There are certain tools that I love to use that I'll be using throughout this video to explain certain things like distances, drive times, and things like that. So if you've been thinking about moving to the Twin Cities for a long time, you've probably been looking at this map a lot, right? You're probably quite familiar with at least the aesthetic of this map and sort of the lines that are associated with it. people pick up on patterns really well. Human brains pick up on patterns. So you could probably show me just this traffic, just this highway map with nothing else, and I think I would recognize it as saying, is that the Twin Cities Metro? And one thing of note is that I think our metro is laid out in a very, very nice way. I think the fact that we do not have really any geographic boundaries other than this river to the east, right, which is fundamentally the St. Croix River, and of course the Mississippi River coming through here, and the Minnesota River. Basically, aside from rivers, we don't have geographic borders, right? If you think about other very, very happening places to live, let's say Denver. Denver is a very popular destination for people to relocate to. Denver has the mountains to the west, and so expansion westward is difficult, right? It's much more complicated than here, right, where we have basically a pretty flat metro. That said, there is a lot more interesting topography than I think a lot of people expect. A lot of folks say they are surprised by the rolling hills and the variety, the cliffs, and the basically just the amount of topographical change throughout the Twin Cities. But you have Denver to the west is the mountains. Chicago to the east is a massive lake. You cannot expand to the east in Chicago. Seattle to the west is the ocean. Anywhere on the west coast, right, to the west is the ocean. And that's where all of those biggest cities are on the west coast, is right up against the ocean. Understandably so. Ports and whatnot, right? Very, very important to the growth of those cities over time. But once they become robust, very complete cities, the expansion can only happen in 3 of 4 ways, and sometimes only 2 of 4 ways. Whereas the Twin Cities on the whole has expanded out evenly, pretty consistently. If we're looking at the map here, right, you can see that here's Minneapolis, here's St. Paul. The West has expanded a little bit more than the East, and some of that probably has to do with the river, but there's still a lot of undeveloped land over here by Lake Elmo, Afton and all that. Along the river here is quite rural, right? So where the gray ends here is fundamentally rural, anything to the east of that, aside from maybe Stillwater and a couple little small towns over here. And some people who are moving to the Twin Cities choose to move to western Wisconsin, right? And because for the most part, at least at first glance, homes are cheaper, right? Living is cheaper. But commute times are consistently quite a bit further, obviously, it's further away, and routes are fairly limited. You can see there's basically one bridge just to the south of Stillwater. There's one bridge just to the south of Hudson. But then from Hudson, there is not another bridge until Prescott, Hastings area. And that's a pretty good distance. As a complete aside, I like a good drive. I like a good scenic drive. And if you're ever looking for a beautiful scenic drive, driving from Stillwater and taking the St. Croix Scenic Byway down toward Hastings, absolutely beautiful drive, especially in the fall. Motorcyclists really enjoy that route. Do recommend. But we're not going to be talking really much about Wisconsin. It's kind of a red herring in my opinion. It appears to be cheaper. And then you have basically all of the politics, all of the state level support that's associated with Wisconsin over here. And it's kind of a different animal entirely. And so even commute times aside, it's quite a bit different. So we're bringing it back, centering more or less Minneapolis on the map here. And you can see Minneapolis is bigger in font size than St. Paul, and it is in fact larger both geographically and in a population sense. I'll illuminate the border of Minneapolis here, and if you ever are watching this channel and you ever hear me say the city proper or Minneapolis proper or St. Paul proper, what I mean by Minneapolis proper is anything within the technical boundary of Minneapolis, right? I just mean something that's not a suburb of Minneapolis. And you can see that Minneapolis on the whole is kind of a vertical rectangle, and it's broken up into a few different what are known as communities, right? So there's neighborhood, that's a smaller section than community, right? And this is all stuff that I learned in making this channel, trying to understand how to explain the Twin Cities Metro. And so you have what's called Southwest Minneapolis, kind of down this way. And so Minneapolis is broken up into multiple different communities. So you have Southwest Minneapolis. And that is sort of this southwestern chunk right here. Then you have what's known as Calhoun Isles, another community. It takes up quite a large space with many sub-neighborhoods within it, including Uptown. I live in the Calhoun Isles community, specifically in Cedar Isles Dean. I have videos where I talk about that. Then just to the north of the Calhoun Isles neighborhood is what's known as the Near North neighborhood, right in here. Just to the north of that is what's known as Greater Camden. Then across the river, you have northeast Minneapolis, right? And interestingly enough, Columbia Heights is not part of Minneapolis. It's actually part of even a different county than Minneapolis. And so you have northeast, and then just to the southeast of that, more or less, is what's known as the University neighborhood. Sometimes you hear it called University Como, but more or less the University area here. Then obviously kind of down in this core right here, that's basically downtown Minneapolis, but it's also known somewhat colloquially as Central Minneapolis, which is strange because there's also a neighborhood called Central Minneapolis. Then just to the south of Central Minneapolis, you have what's known as the Phillips neighborhood, which is pretty small, doesn't take up too much area. Then just to the south and sort of to the west of that is what's known as the Powderhorn neighborhood, and there's Powderhorn Park and all that. And there's kind of a smaller area thought of as Powderhorn, but this is on the whole, this is Powderhorn. To the south of that is what's known as the Nokomis neighborhood. And again, some people will maybe associate just right here with Nokomis, but technically this is the Nokomis community. And then this kind of strangely shaped diagonal slice is what's known as the Longfellow community. And so those are fundamentally all of the greater communities within Minneapolis. Again, many, many neighborhoods within each one of those communities. And then St. Paul is made up of, I think, like 16 or 17. I'll figure it out as we're going here. And as you can see, St. Paul has maybe a bit more of a wide rectangle rather than a tall north to south. And so starting from the west, you have St. Anthony Park, which it takes up a very small vertical slice here. Just to the south of that, we have what we often will kind of refer to as the southern triangle of Minneapolis. Basically anything to the south of I-94 here, and between this river, which is an interesting place where you happen to be both to the east and to the west of the Mississippi. Strange. And this southern triangle, we've talked a lot about on this channel. It's made up of several neighborhoods. You can see Marion Park, small little slice down here, McAllister Groveland, a little bit more of a big slice, Highland Park, probably one of the biggest geographical neighborhoods in all of St. Paul. Then you have what's known as West 7th, this kind of interesting little slice over here. Then there is Summit Hill. Summit Hill is probably some of the most historic homes in all of the Twin Cities, if not maybe the Midwest. And then just to the north of Summit Hill, you have the Summit University neighborhood, which also includes a little sub-neighborhood called Cathedral Hill, which we recently did a virtual tour on. Heading back over a little bit west, you have the Hamlin Midway neighborhood right here. Just to the north of that, more or less, is the Como Park neighborhood. Just to the east of Como Park is what's called North End. It's also known as South Como, which doesn't make any sense to me because it is east of Como. Then to the south of there, you have what's called Thomas Dale. It's also known as Frogtown. Then basically right over here is what is basically downtown St. Paul. And if you go even zoomed in a little bit more, kind of in here is Lower Town. Those are pretty common searches as far as St. Paul is concerned, Lower Town specifically. Then to the northeast of downtown, you have what is known as Greater Payne-Phalen. To the east of that, you have Greater East Side. To the sort of south of that, you have Dayton's Bluff. To the southeast of that, you have Battle Creek. And then tucked just to the south of the river here, there's a small section of St. Paul known as West Side St. Paul. A couple kind of weird quirks of note: West St. Paul, South St. Paul, North St. Paul, not part of St. Paul proper, and Greater East Side over here is part of St. Paul. Why did they do this? I have no idea. And so the Twin Cities are fundamentally broken up into eastern and western halves. And anything that is considered a suburb of St. Paul will likely have a zip code that is 551 something something. Anything that is a suburb of Minneapolis will likely have 554 something something. And so this whole Twin Cities metropolitan area, it includes 7 counties, over 3 million people, and it's about 3,000 square miles. More or less, you'll hear people refer to the metropolitan area as a 7-county metro area, and there's, some places that sort of feel like they're in the metro that are in other counties, but for the most part, it's made up of these 7 counties. You'll see Hennepin County takes up a pretty good chunk of space, and it's probably the densest and most populated. I think that's very safe to say. Ramsey County, which is home to St. Paul, a much smaller county, the smallest in the metropolitan area. Anoka to the north, fairly sparsely populated at the north end of it, but pretty densely populated toward the southern end of it. Eastern, you have Washington County, which is very tall vertically, and from north to south, it goes quite a long way. To the south of that, you have Dakota County, again, pretty large county, and as some of these very corners of Dakota County aren't going to feel particularly developed, right? It's still sort of working on that outward expansion. For the most part, the metro ends right around here, right around Lakeville, Farmington, and down here it becomes pretty rural. Then over to the west, you have Scott County. Again, most of that suburb basically ends somewhere around Prior Lake, maybe Credit River, and doesn't go too much further south down here. Places like Belle Plaine along this highway here are starting to grow, right? Starting to become a little more developed. And then you have Carver County, which again, mostly probably about this eastern half of it is where the brunt of sort of the metro exists. Waconia being kind of a small town, and anything out here being really quite rural. Basically right here in Wright County, no pun intended, and Sherburne County, where you have Elk River, Otsego, Albertville, St. Michael. Those are probably the places that are not in the 7-county area, but definitely feel like they're in the metro area. I'll pull up this map again, and you'll see the gray goes well out to Albertville, St. Michael, Otsego, and Elk River as well. I talked a little bit about the sort of equal expansion in all directions of the Twin City metro area. And to me, what that really does more than anything else is it reduces friction. You talk about Chicago, Denver, Seattle, Los Angeles, New York, any of those places that have grown that way, what they often have are really, really bad bottlenecks as far as traffic is concerned. And while Minneapolis is not without its bottlenecks, on the whole, the metro is laid out so much more efficiently, right? Because of that lack of geographical nuisance. And so you can see here, it's a pretty, complex web, and knowing that the cities are in the center of them and everything else kind of grows out from it, it really makes for pretty easy commute times. Like I said, there's maybe a couple bottlenecks crossing the river into Wisconsin. You have only basically Stillwater, Hudson, and Hastings within the metropolitan area. And there's a couple bottlenecks as well crossing, the rivers more within the metropolitan area, but there's way more of them. I think some of why the likes of Cottage Grove are maybe slightly slower or just recently starting to grow, even though geographically they look quite close to the city, but some of that is because there's just not that many ways to access that east part of that river over there without kind of going around. And so I think ultimately so much of what happens is our city has developed based on commute times. By the way, you'll see all these flood warnings. It's going to definitely date this to I'm shooting this in late June of 2024, and there's definitely some flood going on here. The reality is the Twin Cities metro area is pretty buffered from too dramatic of weather issues. And basically tornadoes and some flooding could be, probably about the worst that would ever happen here. And a lot of the metro, a lot of this river, it's very wide and the river bed is very, very deep. So even though there's flooding, not too many houses are anywhere near these areas. For example, if you were to go kind of right into here, into the Highland Park neighborhood or the Mac Groveland area, and you're standing over here on Mississippi River Boulevard, you are a very long way in overall height from where the water actually. And so if I were to kind of zoom in here, click on Scenic Overlook, this is just a really beautiful place to look at the river. Yeah, you can see, right? It's situated quite high over the river. And so for this to flood, I think we'd have some pretty big problems. I just had to plug in my computer because it's starting to get a little bit laggy, and hopefully once it starts charging, some of that choppiness will go away. But a couple things I want to note is the distance from downtown Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul is pretty often overestimated, right? I think people who are coming from larger or slower moving, higher friction areas really are surprised by how close together these are. It's like 8 p.m. on a Saturday, which, yeah, I'm working at 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. on a Saturday to help y'all. That's what I do. And you can kind of see here, even with this kind of wonky route, it's 17 minutes. This would really get you right into downtown St. Paul, and it's 15 minutes from east to west to get from downtown Minneapolis to downtown St. Paul. That said, this is a pretty busy exchange, right? This is called I-94, cuts through the middle. So the variability between these two is probably about as high as it gets in the Twin Cities, because just the sheer amount of the volume of traffic between there is probably higher than just about anywhere else. A few bottlenecks, a few places where let's say bad traffic is most likely to occur. One of them is going to be basically on a Friday heading up north, right? And there's a couple different up norths, depends on who you ask. For me, up north really is sort of the North Shore of Lake Superior. It's where I grew up going. I love it. It's my favorite place. It's a place that I absolutely love to visit, which, by the way, to get from Minneapolis to Duluth, which is really like where it all starts, right? To me, that's where up north really begins, because so much of probably my memory is associated with the North Shore, and it's the place that I'm the most fond of just aesthetically. The majesty of Lake Superior is something very, very special to me. And so that commute time is 2 hours and 15 minutes from pretty much right where I am, by the way. This is downtown Minneapolis. I'm shooting this at my shop, which is right across the river, right over here. And so if you're heading up north, up to Duluth, right, for example, on a Friday during the summer, then you're gonna hit traffic, you know, all throughout here. It's definitely going to be some traffic. There's also road construction in the summers very, very consistently. For some people, another up north area is Alexandria, right, which is really very northwest, but it's a beautiful area, right around 2 hours, which kind of does speak to the fact that from the Twin Cities, you can get to some really divine nature less than 2 hours, right? 2 hours exactly gets you into some absolutely beautiful areas. Another common up north would be Brainerd, right? Right around 2 hours, right? These are not surprises to me that 2 hours is often that number that people are thinking about, and it's often places where people have cabins. Here's Aiken. A lot of people have cabins in Aiken, in Crosby, in Brainerd, in Nisswa, and these are, you know, pretty consistently right around that 2 hour mark. And another example of a bottleneck is if you're heading up toward the likes of Alexandria or maybe Brainerd or something like that, then another spot where you're likely to run into some traffic is going to be on I-94 here, up by Rogers, basically where 694, 494, and I-94 all connect. Right around here, it's a big bottleneck. And while I'm talking about I-94, 494, 694, those areas are sometimes called the Loop. I gotta say, I grew up here. I never called it that growing up, but it's definitely a thing that I've heard some people say, which is basically that I-94, it goes from Fargo, well, it even goes past Fargo, but let's say it goes from Fargo. By the way, in the movie Fargo, they stop in Brainerd, but it goes from Fargo, travels all the way down here, and then at the city, it splits off into multiple different versions of itself, right? Basically sub-highways, and you have 694 that kind of cuts around to the north of the city. Then you have 494 that cuts to the south of the city, right? They're bypasses fundamentally to bypass the highway. Then you can see over here, 694 meets up with 494 right on the east of the city, which then will cross the highway. And then you would take I-94 all the way east to Milwaukee. Another thing that I think we often help people visualize, or at least conceptualize when we're first chatting with them, is sort of the distances of the metropolitan area. If you're just looking at Zillow, which is wrong all the time, by the way, if you're looking at Zillow or something like that, and you're just staring at a map, the distances, you might be thinking about how far something is in miles to where you come from, to how long it would take to get there. And so some people have this sort of inflated sense of how large the metro is. It is large in overall size. It's a very good sized metro. But for example, we have people say things like, I can tolerate a 2-hour commute. And I just showed you that 2 hours gets to Duluth. And basically, nobody would commute from Duluth to the Twin Cities. For one, in 2 hours, you'd be putting like 110 miles on your car each way, right? So for people who are used to a 2-hour commute on the West Coast, that's maybe 20 miles, right? But a 2-hour commute in the Twin Cities would be pretty unbelievably far, and fundamentally nobody would do it. You can see here as I zoom in, this is kind of the edge of the metro, right? This is the southern tip. This is Lakeville. And from Lakeville to downtown Minneapolis, it's about 30 minutes. And keep in mind right now, there's not much traffic, right? Or there's fundamentally no traffic, although there is still construction, of course, construction happening. But without traffic, for example, most of this metro, it sits right around the 30-minute mark to the closest downtown area, right? I'll scroll down here a little bit. You can see, obviously I'm on the west, so I'm going to Minneapolis. And so this is all going to be pretty consistently in a 30-minute or so range. A couple exceptions would be if you get up into maybe Elk River, right? But it still doesn't even get that far. I'll keep going around to kind of show you all this, pretty consistently 30 minutes. Here's, a little bit closer to 35, which Oak Grove, East Bethel, that starts to feel pretty rural up there, in my opinion. Forest Lake, right around 30-minute mark. Scandia, pretty rural. That's pretty out there. You can see the kind of the limited access there. So that gets up to 45, but very few people would consider Scandia to be in the metro. This area, all fairly rural, especially kind of out in this chunk. Stillwater, 35 minutes or so. And again, that's still just to Minneapolis, right? So now that I'm on the east side, if I go to St. Paul, rather than to downtown Minneapolis, you'll see that it shrinks kind of once again. And I would say Minneapolis, the downtown area, as far as sites, things to do, cultural events, Minneapolis is more likely to host those things. But St. Paul does host a lot as well. And we'll get into that in just a second. I just want to show basically distance, right? So from Stillwater to St. Paul, 20 minutes. And then Afton to St. Paul, 25 minutes. If I go down, I'm going to go down to Hastings. Hastings to St. Paul, 30 minutes, 25 minutes, something like that. And then, that's going to show up over and over again all throughout this metro. And as far as traffic is concerned, right, of course, it's not always going to be 30 minutes. There's going to be traffic. Certain days are going to have worse traffic than other days. The summer road construction season at its peak is probably actually the worst traffic that we get, other than maybe the one-off, two-off or so snow day where we happen to get a lot of snow during the day while people are at work. Those can also really make for longer commutes. But on the whole, I actually think winter traffic is less bad than summer traffic. And if you're ever trying to commute, what would be a basic concept of how bad traffic would be or how much worse traffic would get during rush hour versus not rush hour. For one, Google does have the tool where you can say, let's say, arrive by, and you can say, rather than Saturday, you could say Monday at 9 a.m., right? Something like that. This is something that I often look at. And what's fascinating is The time doesn't go up that much. It shows you a range though, and I think the range can be super helpful. But even more simply than that, than using Google, if you just happen to be, looking up a drive time, I always say like probably on the worst edge, right, of the most consistent rush hour that you would run into, a 30-minute is probably most likely to turn into a 45-minute drive on the high end. So you can sort of add 50% to whatever the drive is. A 20-minute drive can turn into 30 minutes, 30 into 45, and yeah, that's pretty much about as bad as it gets. Now I kind of want to talk about like vibes and what's going on, what's happening in the Twin Cities. And I was talking about how Minneapolis maybe hosts more cultural events than St. Paul. I do think that is true on the whole. And for example, downtown Minneapolis is home to the US Bank Stadium, which is home to the Minnesota Vikings, and Target Field, which is home to the Minnesota Twins, but also Target Center, Target really showing up, by the way, Target Center, which is home to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Whereas, as far as sports are concerned, St. Paul hosts Allianz Field, which is home to the Minnesota United, the MLS soccer stadium and soccer team, and the Xcel Energy Center, which is home to the Minnesota Wild. Between Minneapolis and St. Paul, there are really good music venues in both of them. I think maybe Minneapolis has slightly more, and maybe actually just more large venues for music. But St. Paul actually does house a lot of great smaller clubs, smaller acts, and things like that. So between the Twin Cities on the whole, you have First Avenue, which is legendary, home of Prince. It's probably the most iconic venue in the Twin Cities. You have the Palace Theater, which is in downtown St. Paul, Orpheum Theater, that's in downtown Minneapolis. There's a ton of actually really, really beautiful theaters throughout the cities. You have the State Theater, the Orpheum, the Palace, the Fitzgerald Theater, all truly stunning places to see anything, right? Like they're all really lovely. You have the Turf Club. The Turf Club is in St. Paul, kind of like right along here. That's kind of like a smaller venue. You have the Fine Line, a smaller but maybe cleaner downtown Minneapolis venue, kind of shinier acts with good sound, things like that. Then you have the Fillmore, which is a beautiful, I would say, somewhere in between massive and small size venue. And then you have the Armory, which is quite large. I would say that's kind of the sweet spot. That's like the biggest venue before an act is playing like a stadium or something like that. It's a really, really great place. You walk in and it's quite striking. And like the name implies, the Armory, it quite literally was an armory. And it sat empty for years and years until somebody did something about that. You have the Cedar Cultural Center, which exists in this Cedar Riverside neighborhood. You have the Ordway Theater. You have the Dakota, which is a really good jazz club. You have the Varsity Theater, which is in this sort of university area. Skyway Theaters in downtown Minneapolis. There are a ton and a really, really good variety of places. The one thing that a lot of people love, myself included, is that within the Twin Cities, pretty much any day, any week for sure, you can go see any kind of music, right? We have a hip hop scene, we have a jazz scene, right? We have a metal scenes, hardcore scenes, and also EDM. There are folk artists, there are pop artists. It really runs the gamut. There's world music and some people doing that at a very, very high level as well. A few of the main attractions that maybe you'll use when you're here. One, of course, obviously downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. Another one is the Mall of America. I think for most people, once they live here, they don't go there all that often, but I think there are exceptions to that. There are people who go there probably all the time, but it's a little bit of a tourist area at some point, right? So it's a fun time. I go there every now and then in moderation, just often enough that I can still kind of enjoy it, right? And kind of enjoy like the absolute madness of a mall that's that large. But then just by there is the MSP airport, which is an amazing airport, by the way. It's very easy to get through. And there are two terminals. If you're ever lucky enough to go to Terminal 2, you'll find there's basically never a line. I'm sure there's some exceptions to that, knock on wood, that you don't get, hit by something like that. But I have fundamentally never encountered a line at security at Terminal 2. It's very small and houses, fewer airlines fundamentally. But a couple things. My favorite thing about the MSP airport is that there's a direct flight to Iceland. I love Iceland. It's one of my favorite places to go. I've been there 3 times, and it's a 6-hour direct flight from MSP to Iceland. It's also quite cheap. It's just such a simple flight to get to somewhere that basically feels like you're on a different planet. The airport is pretty centrally located, right? If you're in the northern metro or the northwest metro, your commute time to the airport would be further, right? It starts to get pretty far from there, but so much of the metro has within a half an hour access to the airport. The city's proper, right? Like I live over here. It's like a 15-minute drive very consistently to the airport. That's true of St. Paul as well. One downside that comes with the airport is airport noise, right? So you'll see these runways, these lines are more or less the runways. And so the runways, planes take off and land in these directions, right? So these neighborhoods in particular have some of the loudest airport noise in the city, but there's even airport noise over here. All these neighborhoods are awesome, by the way. Like they're very cool and they're very beloved, but they have loud airport noise. It's the kind of place that people find charming, people want to live, and so honestly, the airport noise does not really affect values all that much, other than maybe the most egregious areas, right? Maybe like right around here, there would probably be fewer people who are willing to buy a home there than, somewhere over here where there's actually, even though it's close to the airport, right over here, you're actually not going to have that loud of airport noise. And interestingly, St. Paul, geographically, physically, is located right next to the airport, but it doesn't get that lot of airport noise. You can see there's basically like a runway, a couple runways maybe, that face this way. I'm actually, I've been helping an air traffic controller find a home, and one thing that he said, yeah, they'll only use that if the wind's blowing very strongly in one direction or something weird is happening, but those are basically used only in strange exceptions. And then you'll also have some on this side of things, so Egan gets some decently loud airport noise right over here as well. Then, like I said, you have basically where are people going on vacation or weekend trip. I'm actually going on a few-day trip up to the North Shore in like 3 days. Up here, that's beautiful. That is fundamentally, this is the North Shore. This is the South Shore of Lake Superior, and this is all Wisconsin. This to me is the best, the creme de la creme. But up north is so much of this area is what's known as up north. You can see all this water, right? So Lake Mille Lacs, huge lake. But then there are all these sort of lake chains that people love to go to for fishing, ice fishing, things like that. You have Leech Lake, another huge lake, Lake Winnebagochish, probably coolest lake name, not Mississippi River, Lake Winnebagochish, a highly regarded lake. Then you have Upper and Lower Red Lake, and one very highly regarded lake is Lake of the Woods. It's partly in Canada and partly touching Minnesota. And it goes on and on. Up here is basically what's known as the Boundary Waters Canoe Area. You'll see BWCA all the time, and it's also Voyager National Park. So if you're ever looking to go canoeing to where they do not allow electric boats with the most pristine water and pristine trees and a truly untouched feeling area, BWCA, Voyager National Park are pretty special places as far as that's concerned. And as far as lakes go in the Twin Cities or near the Twin Cities, this lake right here, this big splotch of water, is what's known as Lake Minnetonka. It is a very beloved and highly used recreational lake, probably the most used recreational lake in all of the Twin Cities proper. A couple, maybe next up would be Prior Lake, is probably really close. And then there's White Bear Lake up here, beautiful lake as well. Then you kind of have to get a little further out to Lindstrom, Chisago City. There's some really good boating and fishing out there. Lake Waconia, things like that. Then one thing that I think is really worth mentioning is just to the southeast by about an hour, you have the town of Rochester. And in the town of Rochester, you have the Mayo Clinic. And Mayo Clinic is pretty widely regarded the best hospital in the world. It is truly a revered hospital that has like legacy. It's kind of crazy how well respected it is. As somebody who grew up in Minnesota, it's so close, right? But you don't realize that people will fly from overseas, right? There are super wealthy folks who will fly private or whatever to a pretty small airport in Rochester to go to what is undoubtedly one of the best hospitals in the world. Last year, it was voted the #1 hospital in the world for the 6th straight year, according to Newsweek. And now I'd like to just talk about like parks and green space and all the outdoor, the access that we have. Minneapolis kind of has a nickname that's the city by nature, right? And I really believe that Minneapolis is one of the most beautiful cities in the country, at least, and it's been developed in a way that I think really gives incredible access to green spaces, to natural elements, to water that is pretty undeniable. So Minneapolis has the nickname the city of lakes, the city of parks, and the city by nature. And one thing that I talk about a lot, actually I'm just putting out a video on this channel, maybe I just did, I don't know when it's out yet, but it's about the bikeability of Minneapolis. Watch that video. If that piques your interest, the reality is Minneapolis is probably the most bikeable city in the country. It often wins, first place or second place, with Portland being sort of who we're often competing with. And a lot of that comes down to the city design and the intentionality behind making it such a great space to go biking. And so in the city proper, you have what's known as the chain of lakes. This is just something that I'm particularly in love with as somebody who lives here. You have Lake Harriet, Benamacoska, Lake of the Isles, and Cedar Lake. That's really the big lakes. There's also this little guy called Brownie Lake. But this is all called the chain of lakes. And there's something called the Grand Rounds Scenic Byway. Again, I talked about that in the biking video. But very quickly, this is going to be crude, but it's a bike route, like a 51-mile bike route that goes basically following this cursor up here, up through Theodore Wirth Park, up through the Victory Memorial, across this way, through here, down down here, to the river, and then sort of around the river, and then across here, which is called Minnehaha Creek, and it connects all the way back up. It's a pretty perfect loop. It's huge, and even if you don't do the whole loop, it's an incredible way to sort of experience the natural beauty of the cities. St. Paul, also very bikeable, right? And both Minneapolis and St. Paul have a really, really high level of park spaces. I can't remember who did it or where it was, but there was an article or a study about park availability in major metropolitan areas. And St. Paul and Minneapolis were ranked 2nd and 3rd, respectively, second only to Washington, D.C. I've helped actually quite a few people move here from Washington, D.C. And most people are surprised to hear that Washington, D.C. is, but then you sort of say, like, sure, what about the monuments and things like that? And they're like, oh, sure, yeah. There's a lot of parks in DC, but it's very, very tourist heavy. So they don't necessarily consider that there are a lot of park space available, whereas the Twin Cities, the tourism is not extremely high. And so the parks are used by the people who live here. And then let's talk a little bit about state parks. There are 65 state parks in Minnesota. You'll see kind of most of them, right? So any of these black dots are state parks. You'll see there's a denser sort of collection of state parks along the eastern edge of Minnesota, especially up this way, right? Up toward the North Shore. There's a lot going on there. And then in this, what's known as greater up north, there's a lot going on here as well. And then, like I said earlier, right up here is the only national park in Minneapolis, which is Voyageurs National Park. Of course, there are really, really great regional parks. A couple of note, Theodore Wirth Regional Park is a highly regarded place for mountain biking and things like that. There's also a golf course. It's way beautiful beyond just mountain biking, by the way, and it's also massive, and it is technically within the city. So to have a regional park within the city, pretty cool. There's also Hidden Falls Regional Park. There's also Minnehaha Regional Park, which is home to Minnehaha Falls, which is the largest waterfall in a major metropolitan area in the United States, and it is just a beautiful park space. You can see it's quite large. There's disc golf, and it is just a beautiful place to spend a weekend, a weekday, whatever you want to do, right? Lebanon Hills Regional Park, another really lovely regional park, also sort of adjacent to the Minnesota Zoo, which is a really quite a great zoo. It's also home to something called the Zoo School, or SES, which is School of Environmental Studies, which, if that's at all interesting to you, that's something worth a Google. I'm just gonna shoot that out there just so you have it to think about. And then you have places like Bryant Lake Regional Park, which is a really, really beautiful place as well. One thing that a lot of people are excited about when moving to the Twin Cities are the schools. I could do a whole video on just the schools. In fact, I have a whole channel called Schools in the Twin Cities that my friend Bradford started. The videos are difficult to make. They require a lot of research. And so the videos don't maybe come out quite as often as this channel, but we're trying to create this very, very useful tool, this useful guide to understanding the schools in the Twin Cities. But one thing that I find particularly fascinating about our schools here is that you can be in the top 25 school districts in Minnesota, which probably 23 or 24 of them are within the metropolitan area proper. There's maybe like 1 or 2 exceptions to that. And if you're in the top 25 schools in the metropolitan area, I think you're within the top 10%, maybe even a smaller number than that, top 10% of the entire country. And that covers a lot of area in our metropolitan area. And so based on niche.com's rankings, which are pretty darn good and pretty darn thorough, I'm just gonna kind of show you where those are more or less on the map. So the #1 ranked school in Minnesota, and literally in the top 50 in the country, is Wayzata Public School District, which sort of takes up this kind of big old chunk right around here, right? And the population of that school district is somewhere around 11,000 students, which is more than the city of Wayzata itself. I think Wayzata has like 3, 4, maybe 5,000 people. And the school district, because it's much larger, has more students than Wayzata actually has residents. Then you have the Minnetonka School District, which is just to the south of that, kind of sitting in right here, more or less. You know, it's ranked, I think, 2nd in the state and really highly regarded. And it basically borders Wayzata, right? So there's some commonality in there. And then just to the south of the Minnetonka School District, you have the Eden Prairie School District, which is kind of more or less in this area. That is ranked 3rd according to niche.com. So you kind of see this trend, right, in the western suburbs, that's 1, 2, and 3 are right there. And then pop over just a little bit to the east, you have the Edina School District. Edina is ranked #4, and more or less it's going to take up a square something like this to be technically within the Edina School District. Then in this top 5, the only one that isn't basically on this west side is Woodbury. Woodbury schools are huge, and it's really Washington County School District, but very highly regarded. Again, it's in the top 5. Woodbury on the whole is very large, and not all of this is served by that school district. Some of it is actually served by Stillwater, also very highly rated schools. And then also a slice of this is actually served by, I think, Oakdale or Maplewood. I don't remember exactly. It's not on the top 25 anyway. But then we're gonna head back over to the west to Orono, which is probably the smallest overall student population of anything that we've talked about so far. So Orono, to be in top 5, it's definitely the smallest. I pretty safely can say it's the smallest in that top 5. And then the next one is actually kind of an interesting spot. It's called Nova Classical Academy. It's actually a charter school in St. Paul proper, and charter is a very unique thing. Go watch that school's channel. If you don't know what charter is about, Bradford has explained what they are quite eloquently. And this is ranked 6th in the state, and it's a K through 12 district, and it's really quite small overall. The population size is very, very small, and it's a very specific learning style. Then we're hopping back over to the west over here where you have Hopkins School District. It's not a huge district. It takes up something like this kind of space. It's kind of tall vertically, north to south, not vertically, not literally vertically, but north to south on the map. And then you have down south, Lakeville School District. So Lakeville School District is quite large, and Lakeville on the whole is quite large. Lakeville in general as a city is probably, I think, the fastest growing suburb in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. You have top 10 schools, you have a lot of newer built homes there, but probably most of the development started in the late 90s, and now it's late 90s all the way to new. It's a really beautiful area. It's actually where the aforementioned Bradford lives, and schools were definitely one of the considerations when they moved there. Then from Lakeville, we're going to go to basically the opposite side of the metro, to this North Metro area, where you have the Mounds View School District. Mounds View School District is definitely the most affordable top 10 school district in the state, right? By a healthy clip compared to all of the previously mentioned places, this Mounds View Public School District will be the most affordable. You'll probably also have the most modest houses in that school district, but depending on your budget, if schools are a priority, I would consider looking at Mounds View, right? If you have a lower budget or anything like, even if you don't, Mounds View School District, you can get a beautiful house in that area as well. But the affordability of the Mounds View School District on the whole is pretty next level compared to a lot of pretty much everything else we've talked about. Then the next on the list is not in the metro. It's actually this Sartell district, Sartell is more or less a suburb of St. Cloud. St. Cloud is a much smaller metropolitan area. We don't really talk too much about the St. Cloud area on this channel because it's just so far removed, right? It's not really what we're talking about on to the Twin Cities. But nonetheless, it's going to be more affordable than some of the Twin Cities, but it's definitely the most expensive area up here by St. Cloud. Then we have the school district that I grew up going to, which is 196. I say that partly because I went there and I know the number well, but because it's also contains Apple Valley, Rosemount, and Eagan, right? So it's kind of a hodgepodge of what places it serves. But yeah, it kind of contains this big area. And that zoo school I mentioned, I don't know if it's technically in that district because it's such a unique school, but it would fall within the map borders of it anyway. And then from there, you have the St. Michael Albertville schools, which I said earlier, St. Michael Albertville is basically that very furthest edge, northwest edge of the Twin Cities metro. You're still, within 40 minutes of downtown Minneapolis, but it's the most out there, physically, geographically, it's the furthest away from the cities of anything we're talking about, aside from, I guess, some of the ones coming up. So far, it's the furthest of what we talked about. Waconia is next up on the list. Shout out to Paul, who works with me. He grew up in Waconia, went to those schools. Great guy, good school district, and obviously ranked quite well. But you'll see Waconia is way out here. It's on the edge, debatably not even really in the Twin Cities metro, just outside of it. And then the next one on the list is also similar. It's called Northfield. I love Northfield. I think it's a beautiful town. I have a virtual tour of Northfield. We've had people who just fall in love with Northfield and they say, it's Northfield or nothing, and I'm gonna wait until the right house comes up in Northfield. And there are a few places like that, by the way, somebody looking for a small town I have a video on this channel. I'm not trying to just, hype everything I talk about on this channel, but I also have a video on this channel called Best Small Towns Around the Twin Cities, which I will maybe talk about later in this video. It depends. This video is already getting long. Then you have Eastern Carver County Public School District, which is, again, back out west here. We're talking Chanhassen, Victoria, Chaska, right? This kind of area over here, that's the Eastern Carver County Public Schools. Then Delano. Delano would probably be the next on the list as far as affordability is concerned. You'll see it's right here, right on the edge. I've helped some people move there. We helped some people sell a house there. Delano is a very cute little city, but it's very small. Yeah. I'm hoping I have some people that I helped move there from a different country who I'm hoping I can have on the podcast to talk about their experience there. They're still living here and they are really, really thriving there as well. Then you have West St. Paul, Mendota Heights, and Eagan, which kind of takes up this strange little section right here, right? I don't know what, it's not really that strange. It's just kind of an interesting combination of places, similar to how Apple Valley, Rosemount, Eagan kind of has it overlaps a bunch. So too does this district. Again, we're still in the top 25. These are still really, really highly regarded schools, highly rated schools, as far as certainly on a national level. Then you have Prior Lake and Savage. So that's kind of right down here. Not that big of a district either. Again, Prior Lake has a great recreational lake and all that, like the name implies. Then next up is Roseville. Roseville is, again, kind of on that affordable side. It's really close into the city. And aside from probably Edina, which I mentioned earlier, so far it's the closest one to a city proper, right? To either St. Paul or Minneapolis. So yeah, other than Edina. And then there's going to be one other one that's probably equally close. And then from Roseville, we're going back to the western and just about as far southwest as you can get to Shakopee School District. Again, you're kind of at the edge of the metro there in Shakopee School District. Shakopee is home to Valley Fair, which is actually flooded right now. One of the places that did get flooded. It's kind of crazy. It's a theme park. It's home to Canterbury Park, which is a horse racing track and also sort of like a card gambling place. And then it's also home to Mystic Lake, which is a casino. And then lastly, again, this one is very close into the city. It's St. Anthony and New Brighton. Here's St. Anthony. New Brighton is basically right over here as well. Here's St. Anthony. Here's New Brighton. St. Anthony abuts right to northeast Minneapolis. It abuts right to the university area. Another really, really great area. And the access to be in a top 25 school with that good of access and also pretty relatively affordable. St. Anthony is small but mighty. And schools are one big reason that a lot of people move here, or maybe just that reason that people are excited to move here is because the schools here are so good. By the way, that was top 25. There are other schools that are very highly regarded that didn't even make that list. So depending on what you are prioritizing, let's say if you're just prioritizing academics, there are maybe lists that don't make the top 25 because maybe they don't really have a sports program, because that's not what they are prioritizing. But depending on what you prioritize, you can definitely find what you want. And there are so many very highly rated schools within the Twin Cities. But another factor, for sure, is our economy and the opportunity that exists in form of large companies, not even large companies, but smaller businesses and all that. And so I just want to kind of show you on the map here, more or less, where kind of the biggest of the Fortune 500 companies, really probably Fortune 100, most of these, but where most of these are, or these biggest ones are. And so first you have United Health Group, that is located in Minnetonka, right, kind of out west here. Then you have 3M, that is located in Maplewood, right along I-94 here. They make their building light up like a Christmas tree during Christmas. It's very cute. Then you have General Mills, that is in the Golden Valley area. Then you have Target. Target, the main headquarters is in downtown Minneapolis. Target is everywhere here. And same with 3M. There are several locations to both 3M and Target. Then you have Xcel Energy company. That's in Minneapolis as well. And then there's Best Buy. I actually used to do some work for Best Buy corporate at a photo studio, building sets. Weird job, feels like literally forever ago. And that's kind of right here in this Richfield area. Again, pretty close to the city as well. Then you have CHS, which is way kind of over east out here in Inver Grove Heights. Then there's Ameriprise Financial, like a lending institution or lending servicing anyway institution. That's in Minneapolis proper. Then there's IBM in Minnesota, which is actually, again, out here in Rochester. The main office of IBM is in Rochester. So Rochester, to me, is the Mayo Clinic and IBM, and that's a lot of what's going on out there. And then you have Cargill, which to my knowledge is the largest privately owned and not sort of publicly traded company in the country, I think. And that's over here in Minnetonka as well. Then to the north of the cities, Arden Hills is home to Boston Scientific, and just tucked to the west of there in this kind of smaller area called Fridley is home to Medtronic. And one thing that I know that even myself on this channel, I've not necessarily given enough credit to is our public transportation system. I know that in our pros and cons video, I've said it's just so-so. And maybe that's because we don't have as many trains, right? And maybe I associate trains with, the best possible transit system. We only have really two train systems as far as public transportation, really light rails go. Obviously we have heavy train. We have quite a bit of heavy train here. But the first light rail that came to Minnesota basically starts at the Mall of America, goes through the airport, which is very convenient, by the way, and kind of works its way down here. And this diagonal highway here, Highway 55, bops in here, goes through Cedar Riverside, gets into downtown Minneapolis, goes by US Bank Stadium, and basically ends at Target Field right over here. And then there's a second line that came in called, I want to say it's the green line, whatever, it's the other one, that starts over here at Target Field, works its way across, shares the same track through Minneapolis, and then cuts through here, goes to the University of Minnesota, heads up to University Avenue, and rides along University Avenue for most of its route, right? Goes past Allianz Field, again, down here, goes right past the Capitol, and sort of ends up down in here and more or less terminates at CHS Field. There are a total of 37 light rail stations. I can put a link to the map in the description. There are 99 bus stations throughout our metropolitan area. We have 7 commuter rails. So aside from the light rail, there are 5 other different styles of commuter rails that go further outside the metro area. We have 115 rail vehicles, and really the most robust aspect of our public transportation system are buses. We have 916 buses. And so busing is the most common way to use public transportation around Minnesota. And again, it is robust. There's a ton of it going on. There's basically sort of like 2 branches as far as, at least that's how I think about it. There's like 2 main branches to the public transportation. In the city proper, there's Metro Transit. Some people will just call it the Metro. That's not really what we call it here. So if you ever see one and you're like, oh, it's the Metro, that's not really what it's called here. It's called Metro Transit, and really just the bus. It's probably a little bit more accurate to how we talk about it. But then there's also the MVTA, which is the Minnesota Valley Transit Authority, which serves 7 communities to the south of the Metro. And there are a few other things like this, right? Where they're sort of the suburban equivalent of Metro Transit. And MVTA, they all connect, right? So they all talk with each other, and you can hop on one bus and get off another. But MVTA serves 7 communities to the southern portion of the metro, like Apple Valley, Burnsville, Eagan, Lakeville, Rosemount, Savage, Shakopee, and Prior Lake. And more or less, those other places are sort of using express routes to get from the suburb into the city proper. And then as we dive sort of back into the map, I just want you to know that I have done a video on just about everywhere in this metropolitan area. And so if you happen to find yourself looking at Zillow, or you can download the app that we recommend you use. Once we start working with somebody, we basically say, this is the app that you got to use, because Zillow's wrong all the time. Realtor.com, those are lead generation sources. They're not, they're not as helpful as this app, which is called HomeSpotter. Again, it's down in the description. You have to download it from that link, otherwise you get like kind of a crap version of it. So if you want, download it there. And as houses come up that you find interesting, you haven't spoken with us yet, so you're still kind of figuring out, where are the places that you want to end up. If you find a house you like, that suits you, that basically has the character or the charm, or just the size or the rooms or the facade or whatever that you like. And if you're wondering what that area is like, there's a very, very good chance that you can search it on our channel and that we have a video on exactly that suburb or that neighborhood within the city or anything like that. There are very few places within this gray area that we have not covered. And I think it's pretty safe to say that there is nobody who knows the entire Twin Cities metro quite like we do. And so if you're interested in working with us, we would love to help you. This video has taken me, by the way, 2 hours to shoot. I won't be that long edited down. It will be long, but it won't be 2 hours. It's taken me 2 hours to shoot on a Saturday night for y'all. And so if you'd like to work with us, we are the hardest working real estate team in the game. We practice what we preach. And so you can go to our website, tothetwincities.com. If you're still watching this, thank you very much. I appreciate you a bunch. And I hope I get to work with you. Hope we get to work with you. And yeah, pretty soon here, we got a Twins game meetup. We rented the Corona porch. We try very hard to, take good care of our clients. Obviously, in the real estate process, but even past that, for the people who have relocated here, we try to do events and try to help them at least start to create some community if possible. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.